That's that ruined, isn't it? That's what I was...
This is funny. And this is funny. But which is funnier? When a show is remade for a different audience, it's natural that both fans and critics will immediately make comparisons between it and the original. You could say that the US version of The Office had the odds stacked against it from the start. No matter how good or bad it was, every little detail was always going to be compared to the original. Showrunner Greg Daniels initially decided that for the pilot episode, straying too far from the original was too much of a risk and opted to go for an almost direct adaptation of the first episode of the British version. So making a like-for-like American version of the original wasn't going to work. It felt like a lot of the humour got lost in translation. However, as the US version gradually made slight changes to the characters' personalities and the show's tone, making it more optimistic and the humour slightly wackier, it developed into a show of its own. Ironically, the more that the US version distinguished itself from the already popular British version, the more successful it became. There are a lot of differences between this version of The Office and this version of The Office. They are almost completely different shows. However, what's interesting is that it's actually the differences between the two shows that highlight what it is that makes each show so great. The UK version of The Office only ran for 14 episodes. It was a very short run, but it suited the series perfectly. The behaviour of the David Brent character meant that it would have been unrealistic to think that he could survive any longer in his job. The short run of the series means that there's no real character development. As a mockumentary, the show spends a short amount of time at a mundane office, focuses on a small number of characters, and then leaves. Life goes on. It suits the premise of the show perfectly. In the UK, it's common for a TV series to produce just 6 episodes per season, with the series usually created and written by just 1 or 2 people. However, in the US, far bigger production budgets mean the standard for a comedy series is to produce over 20 episodes per season, with a much bigger team of screenwriters. Aside from this giving the writers the freedom to move away from the storylines of the original series, a longer running show also allowed for greater character development. The UK Office mainly focused on 4 characters. However, the large number of episodes meant the US version could expand the primary cast to include a strong collection of memorable characters, and this played a huge part in the show's success. The longer running series also allows for the characters' story arcs to develop over time. I mean, who would have thought that by the time the extremely unlikable Michael Scott character from season 1 was to exit the show in season 7, it would be viewed as the heart of the show leaving. Of course, the long-running character arcs aren't always for the best, with the case of Andy Bernard's bizarre character development in season 9 being a good example.
You're catching things that are totally going over my head.
When the UK version of The Office first aired in 2001, one of the first things that stood out right away was how much it looked like a genuine documentary. The show satirised a number of fly-on-the-wall documentaries that were popular in the UK at the time, and when you first tune in, you could be forgiven for thinking you're watching a regular documentary. Well, until something like this happens. Although the US Office did opt for a similar look in its first few episodes, from season 2 onwards I definitely don't think you could ever mistake the show for a documentary. It feels more like a sitcom using the mockumentary format. The multiple camera angles and quick cuts certainly don't feel like a fly-on-the-wall documentary. That being said, the show uses that mockumentary format to its advantage extremely well. The camera work in the show is often used to shape the narrative and allows for the show's characters to connect to the audience, I guess you could say that it uses the documentary format to its advantage when necessary, while still, for the most part, maintaining the structure of a regular sitcom. When you think of the humour in the UK version of The Office, the first word that springs to mind is awkward. One of the original examples of cringe comedy, a lot of the show's humour is channeled through David Brent's awkward interactions with other people. These awkward moments are part of what's so great about the show and what makes it so unique. However, the cringe comedy is done so well that as an audience it's sometimes difficult not to watch certain scenes through your fingers. The show intentionally leaves long pauses during awkward interactions, and as an audience you feel as though you're in the room, trapped in that awkward moment. Although Michael Scott has plenty of cringeworthy moments, the scenes never feel as intense as those with David Brent. This definitely makes the US Office more appealing when it comes to re-watching the show. The way the UK version can make you feel so uncomfortable is truly a unique achievement. However, it does make repeat viewing less appealing, compared to the more light-hearted American version, which is a show that's easy to drop back into. When the US Office was struggling to connect with American audiences after its first season, the show's creators made a conscious effort to make the show brighter and more optimistic, and the changes are obvious from the first episode of Season 2. The lighting of the show is increased to give Dunder and Mifflin a less depressing feel, and the show's main protagonist Michael Scott is very slowly made a more likeable character. I think the optimism in the US Office, and indeed the lack of optimism in the UK version, is probably the thing that, more than any other, defines each show. In both shows the mood is set right from the opening credits. The UK Office opens with incredibly mundane, boring shots of an industrial estate and a slow, downbeat instrumental. The US version features an upbeat soundtrack and fast cuts, implying a far less depressing place to work. The opposing levels of optimism are probably a good representation of the difference in tone of British and American comedy in general. British comedy is often more pessimistic and finds humour in a character's imperfections. It celebrates the idea that life is not perfect, and neither are people. American comedy often takes a far more optimistic outlook on life. The theme of self-improvement is often at the core of a show's run. A character's story arc will finish with them as a better person or in a better place than when the show began. The series finale of each show reflects these opposing levels of optimism perfectly. In the series finale of The British Office, the audience is given just the tiniest glimmer of hope for the David Brent character. He manages to just be himself with his blind date, who actually appears to enjoy his company. And in this scene, you're given the impression that David might actually have learned to stop trying so hard to impress everybody around him.
Chris, why don't you fuck off?
In the longer-running American series, the journey of Michael Scott is given a far more optimistic ending. Leaving during Season 7 to live with Holly, his return in the series finale reveals that Michael now has kids and the family he always wanted.
It's every parent's dream.
Honestly, I think it's impossible to pick a winner out of the two shows. I hope that doesn't sound like a cop-out, but I really don't think there's a need to. They're two very different types of shows with two very different styles of comedy. The premise of the UK version of The Office was so unique at the time, and it stands today as a classic piece of television. Only 14 episodes long, it really is a masterpiece. Of course it's the inspiration for the American version. However, the way the US Office was able to take that concept and slowly apply subtle changes until it hit the right balance was truly a great achievement. From Season 2 on, almost everything in the show was original, and as it moved in its own direction, it grew into one of the funniest sitcoms of all time. Wackier and less realistic, it featured a brand of humour completely separate from the British original. Personally, I'm just glad that after getting this great show, we also got this one. In this case, 2 is definitely better than 1.
That's what she said.
That's good.
Oh.
Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel grow.